As our gathering and conference comes to a close, the theme set for discussion will not be complete unless we bring it to the most important contribution that Sri Aurobindo has made to the next step in evolution. We have seen so far the logic of the evolution, even to some extent the process of the evolution, from matter to life, from life to mind, from mind to supermind, and then even finer gradations in between, rising into supermind, of which we especially dwelt upon the intuitive consciousness as the ray of the supermind that can lift our mind, bring into it a light and change its entire working. But Sri Aurobindo points out that there is still one problem that remains. Even if we rise into the supramental consciousness and from it begin to act in life, a consciousness of infinity which is of utter truth without any ignorance, will have to act through a mind which is by definition an instrument of ignorance. Why? Because mind is a power of division. Its function in evolution, in this whole universe, is to divide, is to cut up, is to place finiteness in relation to finiteness, and inherently is unable to manage infinity. And therefore, even if from a consciousness of truth we act in the world, we have to pass through mind, through life, and through matter. The very first step in mind would cut up the truth and therefore bring some form of ignorance, some limitation. However true your consciousness may be in the very formulation of it, giving form and thought, it would cut it up and reduce it, and therefore falsify. However limited the form of it would be, there would still be the falsification. And then Sri Aurobindo puts this question before us and says, is there a way out? Can the mind be made an instrument for the pure truth to act through it without dilution, without distortion? Limitation there will be, because mind is an instrument of limitation, but without dilution and distortion of the truth. And then he begins to answer this question. And this is part of his writings in the last few months before he left his body. And he answers the question by saying that yes, there is a possibility. If we look into the very nature of the mind, and for that we have to actually go back to the whole nature of this creation, we will find that within the mind there are finer gradations and finer powers and principles which can be tapped, developed, and opened out. And if mind organizes itself around those principles, it can become an instrument for the truth. And so before I enter further into how exactly this will take place, I want to step back and look at the larger framework of creation in which you will understand this idea better. Remember, this whole universe bursts out of an underlying oneness, indivisible oneness. If it could be divided, then it would not be oneness. And so, however much it may burst out, it can never lose its oneness. How exactly an indivisible oneness translates itself into separateness of form, at least in appearances, is one of the very interesting descriptions for which we won't have time. But still, when it bursts out to manifest multiplicity, there are specific powers of that oneness by which it organizes its multiplicity. And specifically to make a cosmos and not a chaos, there are 7 powers required, 7 principles by which an order can emerge. And again, there's a logic to it which we won't go into. I want to come to the key idea. Each of these principles fulfills itself in the whole. And therefore each of these principles, when it organizes and highlights itself, becomes the basis for an entire world or a plane of consciousness. But the reality is all 7 principles are operating everywhere in the entirety of the cosmos. Otherwise there couldn't be cosmos. And so now we come to the most important idea. Yes, there are 7 planes in creation: Sat, Chit, Ananda, Supermind, Mind, Life, Matter. Each built by that particular principle which presides over that plane. But the principles are in all, and therefore within matter all 7 principles are operating. Within life all 7 principles are operating. Within mind all 7, and so on. Now this is the key idea. Because it is an indivisible oneness, everything is a representation of oneness, and within everything all 7 appear. And if you take one of those sub-planes, within that also you will find all 7. If you take an object like a flower, within that you will find all 7. Everything has within it all 7, because all is an expression of that oneness. Now let's look at the human body. Interesting. Our body itself has 7 gradations of substance, or 7 functionalities within those gradations. The most important, without which we wouldn't be able to stand or act, is the bone structure. The hardest, the most material of matter. Because it is so rigid, we are able to stand or push or pull or lift, isn't it? But its rigidity itself becomes a block, prevents movement. But it has to be rigid in order to be able to hold on to anything sustainable. And so a second level of operation in the human body is the muscle, which represents the life working inside the most material part of matter. It is also made of dense tissue of matter, but it is kinetic. And so the bone structure is in pieces, the muscles move the bone structures, and that's how you're able to move your fingers and your arms and your legs. So it is life inside matter, working on matter inside matter, or the rigidity of matter inside matter, and the combination of it makes for this. And then the third layer, which is the nervous system, representing mind, the power of sending information, knowledge, awareness, sensations all across, controlling, coordinating. Now you see how the 3 principles of mind, life, matter are actually organized within the body as bone, muscle and nerves. And in fact the other higher levels also are functioning. But within the bone, if you go into it, you'll again find 7. Within the muscle you will find 7. Within the nerves you might find 7. Of course, at one point, if you refine too much, they begin to blur into each other. So the distinctions may not be obvious. But the principle is there always. And if this is true equally of the body, the Ayurveda in fact then describes all 7 gradations. The most refined substance, incidentally, for the body, okay, after the muscle, after the nervous system, there is the blood also. And each of these, in the perspective of Ayurveda, each undergoes further refinement to build the material of the next gradation. And the all highest of the gradations is a substance which Ayurveda then describes as the seminal substance of the body, which is used in reproduction, or rather expelled in reproduction. And it is the highest, most refined gradation, which is so fine that although it is of material character, it actually extends in its subtlety all the way into the vital and the mental, and even can touch the spiritual domain in its sensitivity. Now what we see in the semen which is used for reproduction is the most gross part of it, other gradations being so inherently bound in it, but being so less material that you may not always recognize or know it. We recognize in the biology only the particular cellular structure of the sperm, for example, in the male, but the substance around which is carried is much more of these finer gradations. And therefore comes an interesting idea that by conserving this substance, the higher faculties of the body and mind can be intensely amplified and nourished. Because it represents the highest, and that's why it's called the seminal. It's as if the condensation of everything. for which the body has to work through many gradations and layers of filtration. And I think in the Ayurveda they describe it in this way: 7 drops of blood lead to the next gradation, 7 drops of that lead to the next gradation, and so on, all the way to the finest. Which the body therefore has as accumulation for the purpose of reproduction, but also for the purpose of regeneration. You'll see the functions are the same. To create a new body, you need the same energy that you need to create or sustain your own body in its finest, most refined working. And that's why you will find celibacy is considered so important in certain practices or certain spiritual traditions, even in certain religions, if you wish to direct all your energies towards a higher or intenser amplification of higher faculties. Now, even if it is to amplify your intellectual faculties, that is the nourishment for the highest functions of your mind, and certainly also for accessing spiritual possibilities. So you see the rationale of it. I don't want to go too much into this theme, although it is fascinating. It is the same material that feeds the brain and opens in the biology the gradation of substance that responds to mind, and especially higher faculties of mind. And if this substance is weakened, reduced by excessive expelling, the higher faculties of mind begin to dull. It's one of the reasons why it was considered in Indian tradition that especially during your student phase of life, when you were developing powers of the mind, you had to be celibate. And literally the phase of student life was called celibate phase. And then you move into family life, your mind is reasonably developed and formed and stabilized. It may or may not matter. But still there's a difference. When that power or that energy of the higher gradations is intensely built up, all the higher faculties of mind also flow so easily, spontaneously. This idea is important. In matter, there's a gradation that opens to mind. And now let's look at life force and mind from the same perspective. 7 gradations within that in its functions also. But the lowest of these turns towards matter and has almost a material character of life. Life energy, prana, leaning towards its densest gradation, actually plugs into the physical body, plugs into matter, and becomes what we call in physics the energy inside matter. It is the materialization of energy itself. And equally, prana has finer gradations, and then pure prana living for itself, and then prana turning to mind and plugging into mind, responding to mind. And equally within mind, the same 7 gradations within each of those finer gradations, but the lowest of these literally becomes the nervous system or plugs into the nervous system within us. And that's the link point, in the brain especially. That's why the mind, although a mental body of a gradation which you cannot touch or feel, has in its densest parts the part that leans to join with the most refined parts of the physical and the to touch to make the link. That's why the brain responds to mind and not your bone or your muscle. And when the brain has to then translate what it receives from the mind through the electrical nervous system to trigger the muscle to move the bone, and you can see how across layers consciousness connects. That's really the nature of evolution. Evolution is the refinement of the lower gradation turning up and the higher gradation turning down, and the two meeting, joining, not momentarily, but organizing the joint to become now an actual faculty or a power or even an organ of action. That's when you say mind has evolved in the brain. In the monkey, these higher faculties are not so developed. There is a brain, but the brain has not refined itself enough. So from a purely biological perspective, they will say genetically we are 97.4% equal to the ape. And just that tiny bit of percentage of genetic change makes us human. No, that's not true. The genetics measures only the crudest, coarsest part of the physical genetic structure. There is a whole psychological substance which the current genetics does not measure, which contains the larger part which makes us human, which is also transmitted. And that's why today in epigenetics we discover actually if the parents are stressed out or if the parents have developed special psychological faculties, those also tend to transmit into the progeny. Not through genes, through epigenetics, but the mechanism of it is not fully understood. But what it shows you is that in the mind itself now, as it turns to the higher gradations of consciousness, there are higher faculties or gradations which begin to organize themselves as if become organs, powers or faculties of the mind, which then create the link and become the means for that higher consciousness now to connect and act through the mind in a continuum. So now once you've caught this idea, let's go to what happens in the mind. In the mind itself, all 7 gradations are represented, remember? So there's the part of the mind which is bound to the senses, there's the part of the mind which is bound to the emotions or the life energies, which is the emotional play, and then the part of the mind that looks back at itself and says, I'm conscious, I can think and I can modify myself. But this part particularly, and the higher part of it, the next step, which corresponds to the principle of the supermind inside the mind, is the part that stands back now and begins to organize. Remember, the supermind is the organizing power. It is the seed of what we call the intellect. Interesting. And still higher faculties are waiting above the intellect, but within the domain of mind and within those finer gradations. So corresponding to that higher consciousness are gradations or the higher ranges which we spoke of: intuition, illumined mind, the higher mind, illumined mind, intuitive mind, overmind, and all the way to supermind are finer gradations of the mind, not yet fully developed. But the principle as a seed being present, they can develop, they can open out and connect to the intuitive or higher ranges and begin to embody and contain and organize their working inside mind, and that's the mechanism of the transformation of the mind. So now we come to the result of this insight. Sri Aurobindo says that within the mind this power can be activated, developed, and as if an organ or the equivalent of an organ, a faculty, a power of mind organized sufficiently that when the supermind acts through the mind, this organized faculty can receive the truth of the supramental. And while mind is a vehicle of limitation, it would limit the form of it, but not distort or dilute it. And this power he has called the mind of light. He wrote about it only in the last few months because it was something he had been working upon within himself to develop and establish, which has never been done in human evolution so far. And it is in a sense the meeting of the supramental consciousness, meeting the human mind embodied in the body, and the two somehow creating a joint. But this joint itself can then evolve, open to higher and higher faculties, representing more of the higher mind, intuitive mind, illumined mind, and so on, all the way to supermind. So the mind of light becomes the first point on which something of those higher ranges of consciousness can live and act in us without distortion. This allows the life divine, the truth of the divine consciousness to begin to be expressed in life even before you reach the supramental consciousness. And this is made accessible in human evolution even from where we are. But it follows a similar pattern which we have already discussed before. The mind has to learn to become quiet, to open to the intuition and so on, and the rest. The process is same, but this particular formulation of the mind of light is something unique. And the mother describes how Sri Aurobindo was developing it within himself, organizing that power, and when it was time for him to leave his body, he took that power and imprinted it into the mother. And of course through her, because she was connecting to the humanity, to the collective of the sadhaks there, and of course to humanity, through that power is actually organized and held as a faculty waiting to be awakened and developed in humanity. And as a result of that imprint, it will happen. Even if you do nothing, the faculty will begin to develop in people. It may take time, but if you consciously open to it, well, it will happen much sooner. He describes there how this faculty emerges, and it's the same as any other power or consciousness emerging out of the previous. There is a phase in which it comes into its own, assembles its basic faculties and operations, and separates itself out of the lower working of the mind. And then once it comes into its own, then it begins to amplify and develop all its powers. And the first step, obviously, very similar to the development of the intuition. In fact, if you take development of intuition as your goal, in a sense, through that you're opening to the mind of light and its organization, because it's there waiting as a faculty. The initial stages, as we have discussed, the mind becomes quiet and opens for the intuition to descend, or any of the intermediate powers of the higher mind or illumined mind. This is often experienced as a settling from above of an idea, if it is from the higher mind, or from the illumined mind, the settling of a light which reveals, or from the intuitive mind, a settling of the direct identity in the knowledge, and I know because I am already what I know, or still higher ranges. All of these are, we need not make special distinctions. They could all come in any mix into the mind. But the key idea here is that rather than you forcing yourself to think differently, you open your mind and allow that higher power to settle in you and form itself in you. And then it shapes, it creates, it fills with light your current brain and mind's working, and even fills into your body. And it is towards this that our primary effort of practice can be. Associated with it, there will be a movement of rising above the mind, which also we have discussed. You can focus above the head, but there's a sense of a rising beyond, and you begin to experience those higher gradations. The higher consciousness descending lifts you into itself. And so there's a double movement. It lifts you into itself and it descends to fill you and reshape you, and the two complement each other. Each builds and supports the other. And this is how very rapidly the change, the transformation of your mind can actually begin and develop. All depends on the effort that we make to open to it and to give ourselves to it and allow its working. In form of practice, there is a particular way that you can do it, very simply quieting your mind and opening to that which is above and allowing it to settle into you. The way we often experience it, especially in the beginning, is there is a descent of a presence or a peace, and that fills, and eventually the whole body, it fills. And if you like, we can do this as an exercise, as a guided process. We have done this before in one of the retreats, and so some of you were interested in this. We can do it. For many of you it might be new, but it will be a useful and interesting experience, and perhaps a beginning of a deeper and higher practice. The rationale behind it is that just above the head is already the beginning of this presence. And so when your mind turns to become conscious of the space above the head, you begin to feel it. And then as you dwell on it, it becomes more concrete, more vivid to your awareness, until after a point it begins to settle, and then you can consciously allow it to spread through the whole being. So as the first point of contact, just above the head, at the top, that's where the little hole in the baby is seen. You may lightly touch there. That's it, just once you can touch, because it helps you to focus attention. But you will focus not on the sensation on the top of the head, but if possible slightly above. But if you cannot, then just the sensation at the top of the head is fine. You can sit comfortably, preferably with your legs uncrossed and arms resting comfortably. You can lean back. Let your body be relaxed, not stiff, not rigid. Close your eyes. Center yourself for a while in your aspiration, invoking the Divine Presence, the Divine Mother. And gently let your awareness gather at the top of the head, settling at the point at the top of the head where you feel the light sensation. Let all your awareness gather at the top of the head. Let all else fade away as your awareness gathers entirely at the top of the head. And when you're fully settled at the top of the head, let your awareness turn upward gently to become conscious of the vast presence above the head. Gently turning upward, opening upward, like a flower opening, becoming conscious of the vast ocean-like presence. And as you remain dwelling on it, it grows more distinct, more dense, more vivid to your awareness. As if a vast, dense presence, peace, ocean of peace, opening above, extending into the infinity, extending into the universe and beyond the universe. And dwell particularly on the sense of denseness and peace that fills this whole vast presence. A peace, dense, but a peace that is conscious, a vast, dense, conscious presence lit up in awareness, as if a vast conscious presence. Dwell on the sense of an awareness, an ocean of vast awareness. Of the Divine Presence. And now dwell on the sense of the awareness filled with her love. It is the divine love that fills this awareness, that fills this peace, that becomes this dense ocean of peace. And dwell on the sense of the divine love that fills a vast, melting presence of love, utterly aware, filled with a light of awareness, dense with a presence and peace. And you are like a little drop of awareness joining into that ocean. Remain dwelling in it for a while. And gently, gradually, let that presence of peace, light, love, or simply presence gently descend and settle at the top of the head, as if gently pressing down at the top of the head. a vast ocean above, gently pressing down, and slowly, gently let it spread down into the head, as if penetrating through the top of the head, spreading down in a dense, liquid substance, presence, peace, in whatever way you feel it. Let it gently spread down, flowing through the top of the head, spreading down into your brain, descending as a dense liquid presence and peace, filling, surrounding. Perhaps you feel it more densely surrounding the brain. Perhaps you feel it more densely filling the brain. Let it flow to fill, to surround, until you begin to feel a dense, soothing sensation of peace, presence, spreading down into the entire brain, filling with its dense, soothing peace or presence. And gently let it flow down further into the rest of the head, spreading down step by step like a dense liquid substance of peace or presence or awareness, spreading a soothing sensation through the rest of the head, filling and surrounding. Spreading down all the way to the level of the jaws and the neck, surrounding and filling. Until it fills the neck and settles all the way down to the shoulders. Follow with your awareness, simply aware of the peace, presence, light, awareness, whatever way you feel. Let it settle, filling the entire head and surrounding it, neck, filling and surrounding, and settling on the shoulders, and gently spreading down through the neck and shoulders into the chest, spreading a soothing, dense presence, peace, light, soothing sensation of warmth or cooling, whichever way you feel, and let it spread into the chest, spreading down through the entire upper part of the chest and spreading further into the lower ranges of the chest. Gently now let your awareness once again drift upwards, gathering your awareness towards the top of the head, slowly, gently, until all your awareness is gathered at the top of the head. Slowly turning upward to become conscious of the vast ocean above, vast presence and peace, filled with awareness and love. Dwelling on it, let a fresh stream of its presence and peace flow down in a gentle, flowing wave descending to fill, surrounding and filling the brain, following with your awareness as it descends through the rest of the head, filling and surrounding, and gently spreading down into the neck and shoulders, spreading down into the chest and the upper part of the chest, and flowing, overflowing through the shoulders into the arms, following with your awareness as it fills the upper arms and spreads down into the forearms, spreading a dense, soothing sensation of peace or light, cooling or warmth, or a mix between the two. Spreading down into the forearms, spreading a dense, soothing presence, and filling the hands, spreading through the palms into the fingers, filled with dense presence and peace, until you feel your hands and fingers grow heavy with the dense presence and peace. Until perhaps you feel the presence overflowing around the fingers, surrounding the hands and forearms, as if your hands become bloated, filled with the presence and peace, surrounded with the presence and peace, heavy with its denseness. Become conscious of the peace that fills the entire arm, filling and surrounding, perhaps a sense of a bloated awareness around the arms and hands. Become conscious of the peace filling your shoulders and chest, filling and surrounding, perhaps a bloated sense around the shoulders and chest, and around the neck and head, filled with peace. Your entire upper half of the body is filled with dense presence, peace, and perhaps bloated with the peace surrounding and filling. Once again, gently let your awareness drift towards the top of the head, settling at the top of the head, turning upward, becoming conscious of the vast presence above, opening to the vast presence above, the Divine Mother's presence of peace, light of awareness, warmth of love and force, or just a vast, undescribable presence. And gently let a fresh wave of this flow down, following with your awareness as it flows down in one continuous movement, filling your brain, filling your head, surrounding and filling your head, spreading into the neck and shoulders and chest and arms, and spreading down further into the rest of the chest, following with your awareness as it settles into the lower part of the chest. A deep, dense presence, peace, awareness, in whatever way you feel, a soothing sensation, perhaps cooling or warming, or both, And now spreading down further into the abdomen, gently spreading a dense, soothing sensation, filling, surrounding the abdomen, spreading down all the way into the hips, spreading down further into the thighs, a dense, soothing presence, peace, filling like a dense liquid, spreading down through the thighs into the knees, and then down further into the calves, filling and surrounding the thighs and knees and calves, all the way down to the feet, filling and surrounding with a dense, soothing sensation, peace and presence, until you're conscious of your entire body now, like a marble statue of peace and presence, filled with this dense, soothing substance, descending from above, filling your whole being with peace. Remain conscious of your entire body filled with peace, surrounded with peace and overflowing as if bloated with peace. Notice that your mind is spontaneously silent, effortlessly. You do not need to make any effort. It simply remains silent. You can think if you want, but if you choose not to think, it falls silent. Enjoy this state of a silent awareness. Remain immersed in this silence of awareness. Notice that your emotions are quiet. Enjoy this quiet poise of freedom from emotions. Notice that your body is filled with dense peace and presence, unshakable like a marble statue. And gently put an intention that this peace should always fill your whole being. In all activities of life, this should be your base from which all activities will emerge. Become conscious of the awareness that fills the peace, as if a light of awareness that fills, and gently let your awareness dwell on this conscious peace, and gently let it glow into intense awareness of our conscious peace. Let it grow more conscious, more intense, more aware, as if your whole body is filled with brightening awareness. Filling from above, descending from above, filling you with its bright awareness. And gently, as if from above, a soft wave of bright awareness flows down, filling your whole being with its brightness and light of awareness. Remain immersed in this for a while. And gently turn your attention to the presence above and the love, the ocean of love of the Divine Mother and her presence, invoking her presence and her love to fill you, descending in a wave of her love, a soft, tender, melting love flowing down to fill your head, fill your neck and chest and arms and abdomen and legs. A soft, tender love filling your whole being. Remain immersed in this and let your whole being turn in soft, tender love towards the Divine Mother above, in a quiet aspiration, receiving all that she pours down. And gently turning upward in a quiet aspiration, your entire being and all the tissue and awareness of your being, gently turning upward in a quiet aspiration, like a flame turns upward towards its source. And remain in a still, receptive state of aspiration and a quiet communion with the Divine Presence above, with the Divine Mother above. Opening yourself like a flower, giving yourself to her exclusively. Invoking her presence to fill you, allowing her peace and light and love to flow down, to pour down into your head, into your brain, into your entire body, receiving all that she pours, containing like a jar everything that fills you. Remain immersed in a quiet communion for a while. In aspiration, in self-giving, receiving, holding, containing. For a while now, let yourself remain centered in the core of your aspiration, somewhere deep within, perhaps in the region at the center of the chest, or wherever it is within you. Remain centered in a quiet aspiration. And gently now let all this awareness turn towards your life, towards the world before you. That this presence may always fill you and remain within you as you turn to face the world, as you grow conscious of the world around you. And after a while, you will prepare yourself to open your eyes. Remaining inwardly centered in this awareness of the presence that fills you, in the aspiration. And even after you open your eyes, you will remain aware of this as far as possible. Remain inwardly aware even as your eyes open outward. Becoming conscious of your eyelids, becoming conscious of your face. Let your eyelids open, half open perhaps, remaining still inwardly aware of all that fills. With your eyes open, Remain inwardly aware of the presence that fills your whole being to whatever extent. Remain aware of the aspiration that fills your whole being. Perhaps even you may be aware of the presence above to whatever extent. It doesn't matter if it dims. It's normal when the eyes open. If you have not opened your eyes, let your eyes open for a while, continuing this inward poise as far as possible. And after a while, if you feel like, you may close your eyes again and gently deepen into that inward awareness, and you will find the full intensity of the presence is still there, untouched, undiluted. It's only that when your eyes open, there is a dimming of the awareness to the surface parts, but within it remains intact. Perhaps you notice that your mind can still remain quiet effortlessly without thought if you choose to simply be aware in a thoughtless awareness. And even with eyes open, you can remain like this. Remain conscious, thoughtless, with eyes open as far as possible. And if there are any tendencies of thought movement, ignore them or let them remain as if on the periphery, as centrally your awareness remains mostly thoughtless. There are many interesting observations to make with this experience to whatever extent we have received and felt it. The most important thing to notice is that there is a presence which is above and which is felt immediately when you begin to concentrate on your center above the head, turning and opening from there. Also that it descends, and when it descends you feel it substantial, a substance that spreads. And this is the fundamental difference between peace and silence. Silence is an absence of activity, but peace is a positive power of the self that fills you. Where it settles, it may bring silence spontaneously. But in life, if you have to remain silent, well, you can't speak. But when the peace descends into you, you can speak or you can be silent, but the peace remains intact. And so peace is a much more powerful and much more fundamental aspect of the self. And that can descend into the whole body, part by part. And as it spreads, you can feel the sensation of it spreading. And it brings a kind of a stilling, sometimes even a kind of a pleasant numbing sensation. Perhaps you feel some parts of your body slightly numb, and it's all right. It happens when the consciousness interiorizes intensely. But simply putting back awareness there will bring back the sensations. It is not from lack of blood circulation. It's only the interiorization which feels like numb. But you notice when the peace settles in the head, the mind becomes silent or can remain silent effortlessly. As a means of attaining silence of mind, this is the easiest. All other methods, standing back, observing thought, forcing your mind to force it into silence, is painful and struggle. Good for developing your will, but not very useful for a state of a relaxed, spontaneous silence. And for that, the descent of the peace is the much more direct way. What will happen as you leave the room and wander into the dining area, your mind will tend to become active as your body becomes active. But if you're careful, you can hold the poise of silence of mind even when the body moves, and you can nurture a new habit, a new culture of mind being silent, or at least centrally silent, even if peripheral activities happen of thought mechanically. But it's something now you'll have to work upon, to extend it into activity. But the same thing happens in the rest of the body. You will feel the peace or the presence that fills. As you enter activity and movement, it's as if the perception or sensation of it will recede into the background. But if you become quiet, and perhaps even if you close your eyes, you will feel it still intact within. And if you hold the container of your awareness, the jar of your awareness as you can feel it, it's like a container that holds something which fills you. If you maintain that, you can carry this with you into life. And at the background, at the base of your life, in all your activities, the peace will always remain with you. And you will be able to plunge into activity and then lean back into the peace to rest in the peace, and plunge back into activity and lean back into the peace, until eventually the two will join, and you will find the backdrop of peace will always be there, even in the midst of the most intense activity. But this is a work to be developed, to be done. For now you will feel it as two poises that you will move between, but linked, not separate really. This peace settling in different parts of the body also has a healing effect, which we discussed earlier. But you also find the peace is not a blank peace, it is aware. And there's a light of awareness, and the light of awareness also can intensify and make conscious your body or your life energies and in your mind in deeper layers which you were not conscious of. Or the love and presence of the Divine Mother settling in awakens the aspiration, awakens the sense of intimacy and closeness with the Divine Mother, even as if in the physical substance of your body. And to whatever extent you may have felt it, however mildly, it's the beginning of a movement which you can build upon and develop, until one day it will become a permanent state of your awareness. For now it's an experience. And if you take care to carry it, even after you come back from lunch, if you close your eyes and drift into stillness, you will feel the peace still intact. Perhaps even all the way through the evening, you will be able to feel it, if you keep that awareness. And even if you don't, you'll feel something of that peace still intact. Most people tend to lose it after sleep. If the sleep has been unconscious, then it's like your consciousness dissipates, the container spills what fills it. You will also recognize the Vedic symbol here, the Vedic vocabulary, when they speak of the human being as the unbaked jar, atapta tanu. And the jar has to be baked so that it can contain the soma, the delight of being that fills the whole human vessel, the descent of all that comes from above. But the jar has to be baked to be able to contain it. Of course, for the soma, your jar must be well baked. But for the peace to descend, your jar can be just enough. What you have is good enough. And it is with the settling of the peace that the jar will become stronger and capable of receiving the ranges of consciousness above. Sri Aurobindo describes that peace is often the first aspect of the self that settles, and it is the most important because it lays the foundation for everything else. But the other things which can descend after the peace, a light, a gentle glow of presence, or later on an intense flooding light that is even an infinite flood of light that also descends from above. A power, an ocean of power can also descend. Knowledge and the totality of omniscience of all knowledge, the ocean of knowledge can descend. So he goes this way in sequence: peace, light, power, knowledge, and then ananda. But all of these can be held only if the vessel is prepared and baked and made ready and strong enough so as not to spill. And for that, the first step is containing the peace and establishing this as the permanent foundation. In time, the peace itself will begin to widen and your vessel will widen. And when your jar is able to widen to infinity, you can receive the descent of something which is infinite. And then there comes the second part of the work, which is that which you have received in this state of inward concentration must now be extended and bridged into activity of life, beginning with simple, almost mechanical activities, where your concentration can remain indrawn, holding what is received. And then bit by bit you will find you can extend it into more complex activities over weeks, over months, maybe years, doesn't matter. Because whatever has come is the beginning, and every step thereafter will be growth from peace to greater peace, from joy to greater joy, from light of consciousness to greater light of consciousness, and so on. The movement of the sadhana in the integral yoga is always growth of consciousness and joy and wideness and freedom. And if at any point you find yourself struggling or facing conflict or suffering, then you know that this is not the sadhana. Or it is a part within you which is not aligned to your aspiration and is not participating in this movement of opening, self-giving and receiving. So in the movement, there's a movement vertically upward ascending, and then there's a movement of the descending. The ascending movement liberates the consciousness, the descending movement transforms your nature. And every time you face something which is opposing, resisting or suffering, well, recognize it's a piece which has been exposed that is not yet participating. Become conscious of it, gently open it, invoking the presence, the peace, the light, the force, the love of the mother. Giving yourself in that part, opening with love. And the link is made, the suffering is dissolved, the knot is gone. Rapidly. And so the process of the sadhana can be almost as if described in this fundamental relationship of ourself with the divine. I will conclude with a beautiful story, an incident which symbolizes and represents this, but so simply. It was narrated by one of the very early sadhaks. When he came to Sri Aurobindo, he asked to be his disciple. Sri Aurobindo asked a few questions and said, "My yoga is different," explained the difference. And after a while, when the disciple was still in acceptance, Sri Aurobindo looked at him and said, "Although there is no formal initiation, you are accepted." That was the Diksha. There is no other Diksha. Opening and receiving their love, giving yourself in love is the Diksha, the initiation. And then Sri Aurobindo walked to the window. It was on the first floor of the ashram building. Looked out, and there in the garden, the gardener had washed some pots and kept them to dry in the sun. Sri Aurobindo called the disciple and pointed to the pots and said, "You must be like this." Nothing more is said. Now we will elaborate, of course. What is the pot? That's you, the jar. That has to contain the divine consciousness. It must be washed, purified of the things which are contrary. Okay, we don't get too much into that. But the jar then has to turn to face the sun of truth, the light of the divine consciousness and its presence. Turn and open so that the light can fill and you receive and hold. So very simple picture, but as you can see, it can be elaborated into 1,000 words. But the movement, once experienced like this, to whatever extent you have felt it, remember, whatever you experience is the beginning of something. It's the tail end. Let it grow, let it develop. I would like not to break the concentration or the focus of the experience. But if you have any questions relating to this, we can take them up.
Yes. You said that the descent is a transformation, but what did you say with the ascent?
The movement ascending is a movement of liberation. Now you'll have experienced when you were concentrated above the head, opening to the presence above, there was a sense of a vastness, a sense of infinity, which you do not experience when you are in the mind and in the thought or in the physical senses. But initially that upward opening has often a kind of a blurring sense. Your consciousness feels as if slightly on the edge, on the borderline, as if it might become semi-conscious or dreamy at first. The same way as your band of awareness is very narrow. If you drift downward, you sink into a subconscious blackout. But if you drift upward, you rise into a superconscious whiteout. There's a kind of blurring, you lose boundaries and limits. But if you can accept that and stay in it, after a while it begins to organize itself. A new grade of consciousness begins to develop, which is in fact free of limits. It can still recognize forms, but itself is free of limits. It can experience infinity, which the mind cannot. And so as you rise into this and open to it, there is a liberation of the consciousness into the wider infinities and higher gradations of consciousness which will develop, including the higher mind, illumined mind, intuition, etc. But at the same time that you open to something higher, that new grade, to whatever extent touched or experienced or developed, will follow through with a descent. And whatever that grade is will then fill the whole substantiality of your mind, energies, body, even sensations. And as it fills, it begins to work from within to open and reshape in its image. And that's the movement of the transformation. So the upward movement is a liberating movement, the descending movement is a transforming movement.
I felt my whole chair was floating in the air.
Yes. The sense of floating happens when the consciousness interiorizes, you were receiving in your subtle body. That's where the sense of a bloating. Many of you would have felt the body as if bloated, at least in your hands and arms. You felt that? And that's the subtle body into which the descent takes place. The physical body, the gross physical, the densest part, is too gross to feel the descent directly. And the real descent is always felt first in the inner parts, and from within it reflects in the gross physical. And so your consciousness automatically got interiorized with the descent, and with it the sense of lightness and freedom, etc., and increased awareness also. And it's good if you can stay in that even after you get up and walk and through the rest of the afternoon. Yes. Yes, yeah.
So, during that experience, I was aware, but I also felt in a moment, like instantaneously, like I was going somewhere. I don't know where. But then it's like a shock. But I'm not falling asleep.
Yes.
I don't know what's that.
Yes. So as there is an interiorization of your awareness, you lose sense of the grossest part of the body. You still have the sense of a body form, but it's much more the subtle physical or the subtle body. But if you go deep enough, there's a crossing of a boundary. The boundary which we described as which opens to the inner regions. And if you come close enough to the edge of that, or you cross that threshold, there's the sense of a breaking out of your narrowness, of limits, of your normal little personality into something which is much vaster and freer. And on the borderline of that, what you experienced was that sense of losing yourself. But actually, when the familiarity develops, it's like awakening into yourself, losing your littleness. But initially, if you feel uncomfortable, stay on the edge. Let that poise on the edge become comfortable and let yourself get habituated, and then you'll find yourself comfortable drifting further, deepening. Yes.
Every once in a while I saw a face coming to me. I don't know who that was, and it changed. It was not the same face, the same person, but it kept coming back.
Okay. And you were feeling the presence within you?
Yes,
okay.
Yeah.
So,
a person, of a face.
Okay. Was there a particular quality to it, or a sense of a message
Yeah.
or communication? What was that?
Yeah, what was it? I don't know.
Okay, no, but did you feel it was communicating something or had a special quality to it?
No, it changed. It just changed. It was just a face, and then it had black hair, and then the hair went away,
Okay.
and then it had red hair, and that went away.
I would simply ignore it. What matters is what we hold within. Sometimes there are images which may come simply because you're interiorized and your inner senses are now operative. Sometimes the image could be symbolic. That's why I asked you if there was a quality to it or a message. If there was nothing particular, simply ignore. Rather, hold the poise of what you have received. That's much more valuable.
It was not a disturbance.
No, it wasn't. Your consciousness is too filled with peace to be disturbed. But perhaps it had a meaning, doesn't matter. If it was not obvious, you can simply ignore. Yes.
When you get a feeling of rising, does that start from your feet, from Kundalini?
What did you experience?
Well, I experienced like the whole body,
Okay,
but I did not try through vertebra.
okay.
But I'm just wondering which is the
Okay.
right way. Should it be from Kundalini? Should it go through the vertebra?
No. So the way I
Go to the
described
whole
it, ignore the whole body. Put your attention directly here, at the top of the head, and open from there. At that point, you're not even conscious of your body. And let the experience open from here. What we did later, after there was the descent of the presence and peace, the whole body turns in awareness and an aspiration. That's a different state. It's a state of receptivity opening from below. But the concentration above is what opens to the experience and initiates the descent. And for that, you ignore all this, let go all this, put your attention straight there.
When I felt from my whole
Uh-huh.
body, it was like my
Yes.
lower body getting unconscious.
Yes, exactly. A withdrawing of consciousness. Yes. So even that you don't need to consciously attempt. Just focus on gathering here, that will happen of itself. In fact, in the breakthroughs in the journey, the point of breakthrough is always when the full awareness is gathered in a single one-pointed concentration and gives itself to that which is higher. And equally the receptivity and the change that comes, the transforming impact, is when the receiving consciousness, the jar, opens and gives itself entirely, holding back nothing of sense of separateness. So these are some pointers, some indications of all that we have been discussing across these days, perhaps encapsulated in a single concentration or an experience of a kind. And to whatever extent it helps you, you can pursue in your own way.
When I go to Samadhi, I felt the same way what I felt right now.
Yes.
Without trying whatever the steps you told us to do. It just came automatically.
Yes.
And that peace lasts just for a few days, then afterwards it goes away.
Yes. Because when you go to the Samadhi and you open to the presence, she fills you. But you are now dependent on that space. And when you go away, you have not bothered to contain or open to her in the same concentration as you did there. But what this shows you is wherever you are, if you concentrate and open to her where you are, you receive exactly what you receive there. The difference though is there, the physical vibrations, the most dense material vibrations also are as if containing that. But it's limited to the physical space around. You go out and then you tend to lose that. But in your own body, when the descent takes place, eventually it will settle all the way down to your most physical body consciousness. That's part of the work we have to develop. I suppose then we can close with a short concentration for half a minute. If you like, you can close your eyes and gently lean back into the presence and peace that still fills you, and the light and the love that still fill you, and remain open as a jar, receiving all that she pours within us, with the intention to hold this and continue this into the rest of the day and eventually into our whole life.